Well, first of all, hi, I'm Debbie Schwartz. I think a lot of you know me, and I'm here tonight. You'll see Brad Schiller in a little bit. Brad's the CEO of Prompt, and he has a lot of good information to share tonight. But while we're waiting just a few minutes for people to log in, I'd love to know who's here. I assume most of you have a senior, but I mean, if you don't, maybe you have a junior or a sophomore. Tell us, because you'll get extra points for that. And feel free to kind of write where you're from, and throughout the night, you'll have the chance to ask questions. And I also have your questions that people submitted as part of the registration. So we'll get through a lot tonight. But okay, I'll give one more minute. Hi, Katie. I recognize your name. Your son is hard at work right now. That's great. Oh, okay, Victoria. I think you could win the lottery. You have a senior, a junior, and a sophomore. This is going to be a tough 3 consecutive years for you.
Big question. Any triplets, parents of triplets in the audience? Or twins, quadruplets?
Yes, twin sons, twin seniors and sophomores. Sorry, I am a triplet. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, one more second. Okay, so let me just go through my standard housekeeping rules, which are this is recorded. You will get a link to the recording tomorrow. You can feel free to put questions in the chat. If the question is appropriate, I might stop Brad at the moment, but if not, we'll probably get to the questions at the end. It's great to have everybody here tonight. I think you will really get a lot of good information, not just about how to actually write an essay, but kind of where the essay fits into this whole process. And I love data, and Brad is bringing data tonight about, validating, not just, so it's not just people saying it's important. We're going to show you why it's important. And I think that helps people a lot understand the essay where it fits in terms of importance. So Brad, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Debbie. And Debbie is known to interrupt me very frequently during these because all with good comments and things. So drop in questions, drop in comments as we go, because we will address a lot along the way. And Debbie really keeps me honest with making sure I actually cover all the content that we need to cover. But like what I will say is, as Debbie alluded to, like I would say there's 2 things we're going to focus on today. So one is we're going to talk in depth about how colleges actually evaluate your students. Okay. How admissions officers evaluate the applications. Okay. That is really, really, really important. And it will help set the context for like how grades, standardized test scores, APs, your curriculum that your students have taken, the essays, recommendations, interview, activities, like all of it kind of fits together. And we're going to talk about that. But we're also going to utilize data that's actually available that shows how important these different aspects are in the overall application process. Okay, that's what we're going to do. We're then going to focus on what should you actually write about in your essays, which will also kind of lead to all kind of tied together into a neat bow in terms of how your students will be evaluated. So I'm going to share my screen. We got some fun stuff to roll through today. Debbie is going to stop me at all points along the way. If you have an underclassman or somebody that's not a senior, so freshman, sophomore, junior, this is still extremely valuable information, because having a good sense of how colleges will evaluate your student will start setting you up for understanding, hey, what can I do over the next year, or what can my student do over the next year or 2 years to actually set themselves up really well for the admissions process. Okay. Just a bit about me. I'm an MIT grad. That's why I use data, but I also run a writing feedback and coaching company. And we provide feedback and coaching to more students on more essays than any other company in the world by about 20 times as much as the next closest company. So we have a very rigorous process that's actually based in evidence of how to improve writing abilities. We actually collaborate with many writing researchers on many of the things that we do. And so this is what we're going to focus on tonight. Is we're going to kick off with first talking about what your audience cares about. Okay, so your audience is admissions officers. All right. Now, what we'll learn about later is that most students, when they're writing something, have actually never really written for an audience except for their teachers. Okay, sometimes their peers. But the most important thing within writing is to really deeply understand what your audience cares about. And that's also critically important for how you think about your applications, where you're applying, how your students are evaluated, etc. Really understanding what your audience cares about. So the number one thing that your audience actually cares about is that you will succeed, or your student rather, will succeed in college and after they graduate. All right. So the Dean of Admissions at Emory has a good quote related to this, which is, admissions is all about potential. Okay, it's about finding potential. So essentially what they want to do is be able to evaluate the application and understand that this student is likely to be academically successful at that college. Okay, that's really important because for a couple of reasons. Number one, they want to make sure that the student actually graduates, right? They're measured on that. Number two is they want to make sure the student pays tuition all of the years that they're there, right? It's a little bit selfish in some ways, but
it's a business, viewpoint.
It's a business.
Yeah,
it really, really matters. I'm sure some of you might have seen an interesting hit piece on Columbia in the Wall Street Journal this past week. Scrad programs, not what you want, but so the money actually really does matter. And we'll talk a little about that actually as we go here and how colleges actually evaluate applicants. But the key point here is also they want to know that students are going to contribute to the school's community in some way. All right. That's really important because they know that students are coming to their college and paying sometimes a large tuition because they want to not just get the education, but also the connections and have those lifelong friendships with other people. So they're looking for students that are going to contribute to the school's community. And many of them want to also know that you're going to do well after you graduate. So a lot of schools, for example, like Princeton, for example, it might seem like they want all their students to go work on Wall Street in finance, but that's not really actually the case. They want students that go and do a lot of things, have an impact on the world. And, if you make a lot of money, you can donate money back to the school, right? So once again, on the economic side, but this really matters, right? So everything we talk about here and how they evaluate applicants is really related to students being successful in college. That's critically important, all right? So how do they actually evaluate you? Here's the simplest way to look at this, okay? It's a chart I drew. Okay, but this is actually how most schools evaluate applicants. It's the easiest way to think about it. On the left side, we have the academic score. All right, we're going to talk in more depth of what that entails in just a second. But on the bottom, we have the personal score, which is basically the non-academic side of your application. All right, on the academic score, this is essentially your grades, your test scores, standardized test scores. It might include your curriculum, so how strong your curriculum is. So AP classes might count for more than other classes, for example, or if you're in the International Baccalaureate curriculum, that counts for something. Basically, how strong the curriculum is really important here. And then they basically take all that information together and they actually create what they call as an academic index. Okay, so they're basically taking in all the information from your transcripts. To some degree, your GPA is irrelevant because they calculate their own based off of what they have seen is things that are going, indicates that students are going to be successful at that college. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the academic score in more depth in just a second, but that just kind of gives you a high level picture of what that is. Okay, what you see here is there's an academic bar. The academic bar basically means that when you're above the academic bar, this college believes that you are capable of doing the work of succeeding academically at college. All right. That's really important. If you're below the academic bar at a given institution, very difficult to get admitted. You're probably not going to get admitted, okay? But if you're above the academic bar, you've got a shot because they know that you're going to be academically successful or have a high probability of being academically successful at their institution, all right? That's really important. The personal score is the rest of the application. So everything not related to academics. These are your extracurricular activities that are presented in the activities list. These are all of your essays. This is the additional information section, maybe the COVID-19 question that's part of the application. It might be your recommendations. It is if there's an interview, that all plays in here as well. All right. And so one of the things to think about here is that I just said a lot of things that basically goes into one score, right? So in other words, all of these things kind of need to fit together in terms of like an overall storyline about who you are as a student and like how you're going to be successful at that college, how you're going to contribute to the college, all of those types of things, which we'll talk more about in depth later. But it's not like they evaluate each essay individually, right? It's not like they evaluate each recommendation individually. They're reading this kind of in totality as a whole. And by the way, the average amount of time that an admissions officer spends reading an application is 8 minutes. Okay. And so sometimes it's more than that, sometimes it's less than that, right? But on average is 8 minutes. So there's also a personal bar. You'll see some data associated with all of this in just a minute, but the personal bar, most of the time, people are rarely below the personal bar because essentially on the application, they actually have to be able to, the admissions readers are identifying possible character flaws. So if you're writing about very questionable things in your essay, you might be like, maybe the student may, be below the personal bar. It's pretty rare, but once again, if you're below the personal bar, you're probably not going to get admitted, right? So the more above the academic bar and above the personal bar you are, the more your admissions chances. That's a simple way to look at it. Now, by the way, some schools break the personal score into multiple different scoring systems. So for example, at Harvard, who we're actually going to take a look at their data, they actually have an extracurricular score and a personal score. At Emory University, they have an extracurricular score and what they call an intellectual curiosity score, essentially the same as the personal score. The University of Washington in Seattle, they only have an academic score and a personal score, right? But the easiest way to look at this is just these two things because we can actually chart it, right? We don't have like I don't have like a 3-dimensional chart here of things. So how does this actually broadly look? Let's talk about the academic score first. So this is actual data from Harvard, right? So schools do not like to release this data. The only reason why we have this data is because there was a court case against Harvard admissions, and they were forced to actually release this data. They still didn't want it publicly released, and the judges said, hey, you actually have to release this data. So I have read through thousands of court case pages of documents. It's not a very fun process, but I was able to pull out a lot of really interesting data and insights. So this is the academic score distribution. The thing that you'll notice here is that 83% of all Harvard applicants are above their academic bar. That means that they're academically capable of succeeding at Harvard. Okay, this is between 2015 and 2019. There was about 40,000 applicants a year. This past year, there was 60,000 applicants to Harvard. A lot of it due to COVID. So these numbers may have shifted a little bit last year, but the key message here is that students actually self-select where they're going to apply based off of their academic profile, which means that it is fairly likely that you or your student, as you are applying, or your students applying, that they will have similar academic profiles to many of the other applicants at the institutions. Okay. Now we're going to take a look at like, how does that matter in a little bit? And we're going to take a look at differences between highly selective institutions, which really only highly selective because they accept very few students, right, and get lots of applicants. And we're also going to take a look at how does this affect like public school, large public school applicants and that sort of thing as well. But this is really important, right? It's very, very difficult, like to be an exceptional on the Harvard academic score. That's like the world chess champions. You know, those are like the people that are like, okay, yeah, it's not just about having like a perfect GPA, right? Or perfect test scores or anything like that. Harvard has an academic index I was talking about before. They score students out of 80. 8,000 applicants to Harvard a year have a perfect 80 out of 80 on that academic index score. The final thing I'd like to highlight, just related to academics, is it's all placed within context, right? So let's say you have an 80 out of 80 on the academic index, or 70 out of 80 on the academic index. What they do is they actually look at your high school and they look at the strength of your curriculum that you have taken, considering what was offered at your high school. So if your high school does not offer like any advanced placement courses, they don't hold that against you. Okay. If your high school, for example, AP Calculus, only about half of high schools in the entire country even offer any type of calculus. And if your high school is not offering that, they're not really holding that against you, right? However, AP Calculus, for example, just an interesting nugget of information, is the class that's most highly correlated with academic success in college, of any high school class, no matter which college you go to, because it's the most rigorous, like from a difficulty perspective. Although I would say maybe like some of the physics stuff, but just in terms of like who takes a lot of these exams, AP Calculus. But the key here is like, this really matters, but as you see, is like a lot of students are above this bar. A lot of students fit into the strong academic category, to the point where, 42% of all the, last year, 60,000 applicants. So roughly, what is that? 24,000? Yeah, I'm sorry, I went to MIT. 24,000, I should be more confident than that. So 24,000 applicants, they accept 2,000, right? So merely kind of having the strong academic score is not enough, right? And this is, as I said, very similar actually across most institutions. You'll have very similar profiles to this from how they evaluate academic scores perspective. Debbie, any questions have come in on academics or anything like that? Or we're going to be moving on to personal stuff.
I mean, somebody just asked, but I responded, kind of how do you determine what the academic bar is for each school? We're kind of
that's a really good question. The answer is you really don't. So, there's so many factors that go into this. Like I always get asked, like, how do I determine if I'm strong academically at one of these institutions? And the answer is it's really hard to know, because there's a lot of factors that come into play, right? So once again, as I said, I think the easiest way to think about this is look at the totality of curriculum that you could have taken at your school, like in terms of like the hardest classes, and did you take those classes? And did you get good marks in those classes? If the answer is yes, I did, you're probably in pretty good shape at a lot of these institutions, okay? If you didn't, right, then you have to kind of consider, okay, like how do I compare it to maybe other students? You can look at like GPA. That is an indicator, but it's not a perfect indicator. And It depends on where you're applying, because your GPA is actually really hard to compare to other students' GPAs at other high schools, because high schools grade differently. They weight different classes differently, all of that kind of thing. And so usually what I recommend doing is kind of look at, and I know not all schools do class rank, but you can generally have a pretty good sense of where your student is, like within the class. And then you can look at, okay, where did other students maybe go in past years? Where were they accepted, or where did they eventually attend? And you can start getting a picture of, from your high school, for students that are kind of, you consider your peers in other years. That starts academically, that starts giving you a little bit of that picture, at least from an academic perspective. But it's really hard to figure this out. So like colleges do a very poor job intentionally of like releasing a lot of this information, right? If you're in like the top quartile, so the top quarter of all applicants that have GPA or test scores, because they have to publish that information, you can reasonably assume you're like, okay, I'm probably pretty good here, but you might not be, right? At least at the highly selective institutions, because GPA is almost irrelevant at those types of institutions, but it's more relevant kind of as you move to less and less selective institutions, right? And by highly selective, I mean like admission rates like 15 or 10% or below of all admitted students, okay? The other, I was going to make another point here, which is that this does often vary. One thing to really keep in mind, we'll talk more about this when we get to public institutions, is that it sometimes depends on what major you're applying to at a given school. So certain major, let's say at Carnegie Mellon, computer science is more difficult to get into, drama is more difficult to get into than other majors because there's just so many more applicants for the same number of computer science slots at those institutions, right? So their kind of academic profile would look very differently. Now, once again, a lot of schools don't actually release or publicize that information. You're kind of looking at like the totality across the entire student body, which may not give you a great sense of like what the score profile is or the grade profile or curriculum profile of the students within the major you're applying to. And that matters. The other thing to look at is, you know, how many advanced placement or really more like challenging curriculum courses that you've taken. Once again, schools are low. They don't really publish that information typically, but you can sometimes find it out there. For example, I was going through the Harvard court case documents, and I found that the average student accepted at Harvard has already taken, by the time they applied, 5.5 AP courses and had an average score of a 4.7. I saw some there. But that's average, right? Like, so it's you know, they take many students, like I know students that have, you know, they've come from high schools that have offered none of those types of courses, right? And they've been accepted and that sort of thing. But you know, it's once again, like some of these schools are just very highly competitive. And once again, it would be nice if they released information on number of APs, types of scores students get, how they're used in the evaluation process. But schools, as I said, colleges like to do whatever they want,
right?
Essentially, and so they claim like they do it all under the guise of holistic admissions, which basically means they look at the whole person, which also means they also look at like how much money can they pay, how much, you know, other priorities, other things we could talk a little bit about later, you know, athletes and legacies and all sorts of pieces of information. But the stuff that you can control is the stuff we're talking about tonight. And this is, you know, kind of an important piece of it is the academic profile. But once again, it's really hard to know a lot of times if you actually, like, where do you sit? Generally speaking, it's easier to figure out, like, are you likely above the academic bar? Because you're already doing probably a pretty good job of self-select, like figuring out where you're applying. Most likely where you're already thinking of applying, you're probably above the academic bar. Like, that's kind of what this data shows, right? Because only 17% are below the academic bar. All right.
So Brad, I can't remember in your presentation, do you talk, because there is a question about test optional. Do you talk?
Oh yeah, we could talk a little bit about that here. I have more data on this, but I did not include this in the presentation. I think I might have a published piece on this shortly that I'll provide to you, Debbie. You can decide to send it out. But
yeah, that'd be great.
So the answer is, with test optional, is it depends. I am not like a testing expert by any means, but I have looked at a lot of the data that schools have released associated with this. And there are some so the University of Chicago prior to COVID was the highest ranked school in the US News rankings, which I'm not a fan of the US News rankings. If you want to know more of why I'm not a fan of the US News rankings, Malcolm Gladwell just did 2 really good podcasts on the US News rankings that came out in the last couple of weeks. I highly recommend listening to those. It's called Revisionist History, Malcolm Gladwell. I'll give him a plug. I don't know Malcolm, but I hope to someday. But they were the highest rated school on the US News. They went test optional back in, I think it was 2019. So just before COVID. And what they released after that was that they looked at the percentage of students that were admitted to University of Chicago who applied test optional versus applied with test scores, and they found there was no difference. Okay, so in other words, same percent admitted both ways. But this past year has been an open question that depends on the institution you're applying to, and most have not released their data. But what I have seen is that there are some institutions where students that applied with test scores versus not test scores had a 2 times or higher chance of admission than students that did not apply, that applied test optional. Okay. Now take that as you will, because a lot of students this past year decided to, because it was test optional, they kind of tried their hands at universities that they were not going to get accepted at regardless of what they were doing. You know, for example, Harvard saw a lot of, I would say, we don't have the data on this, but I would bet for Harvard had a much higher percentage of students that applied that were below the academic bar, because the students that were applying test optional said, okay, I can apply now test optionally, but they still didn't have like the other academic rigor that they were looking for. But it is still concerning kind of looking at that. So my general philosophy is with test optional, it's take a test, see how you do, right? Practice for the test. And if you don't like your scores, or if they're not kind of in the upper half or quartile even of admitted students at an institution, you may not want to submit them. Okay. That's what I've been mentioning to students. As I said, I'm not a testing expert by any means, but just kind of looking at the data, you know, but at the same time, if you don't think your student, or you as the student don't feel like you're going to do well on that, like take advantage of test optional, right? And put your efforts and resources into other things, right? That aren't testing. The one thing I will say is that testing is used by some schools. If let's say you have a odd academic history, so whether or not that's like grade fluctuations or grade fluctuations due to circumstances that may have been outside of the student's control, or maybe the student got a concussion or some other type of related thing, or has switched schools a few times and it's hard for the institution to pull together the academic profile. Sometimes they look at the test score as like a confirmation of the other data and information that's kind of hard for them to parse associated with academics. But that's kind of the information that I've seen out there. I don't know, Debbie, if you have anything to add.
No, that's very similar. I mean, you know, there's a little bit of a strong debate between testing and non-testing, and people, I feel like they sit on one side versus the other, and I kind of sit in the middle. And so I try and actually not say that much, because the people on both sides are very vocal. But
I both sides everything.
Right.
You just saw me both sides that, right?
Right. But yeah,
because there's not a great answer, I guess.
Right.
You know, that's the thing. And by the way, like probably after this year, a lot of these schools that went test optional are maybe going to go back, but we're also going to see a lot of schools remain test optional because they have found it has benefited them in certain ways, such as giving them more applicants and therefore making them look more selective among other things that they care about, which we can talk more about later, but it's not that exciting.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The personal score. So this is what really matters. And so that's why we're talking about this today. And we're going to actually take a look next at like, how do these scores like interplay together, and like, where do students and applicants sit, and how does that affect admissions? But the key here is what you see is like almost nobody's below the personal bar, right? You literally need to like have character flaws showing your application or your essays or your recommendations. And most students don't have that. Okay. Then you have about 4 and 5 students are insufficient. So basically you start in the sufficient category and you just stay there unless you are like fairly impressive. And you get to the strong, which is like 1 in 5 students. Exceptional, you see up here. That's like less than 10 applicants to Harvard a year fit into that category. So probably not you. You know, these are the people that I don't know, like founded some like nationally known like nonprofit, or you know, something, did something pretty wild, essentially, right? That's used there. But the key is like, this is where you want to be. You want to figure out, how do I get to this strong category? And the answer is really kind of your essays. Okay. And we're going to talk about why and how that works. But the sufficient category, a lot of times there's a lot of really, really, really compelling students that fit within that category, but their applications read flat, which basically means that the students were unable to figure out ways to include their most compelling content within their essay and then present that in a clear and readable way, right, to the admissions officers. So that's really important, right? This comes down to not just like the activities you did, but how you write about them, right? The activity description. It comes down to your essays. It comes down to your additional information section. It comes down to which recommenders you even ask, right, to provide your recommendation and how well that they do, right? It might come down into your interview as well. But this is really, really important. You want to be here. And here's why, is because the admission rate for students here in the sufficient category is about 2.5%. The admission rate for students in the strong category is about 25%, a 10x increase. Okay. 75% of all Harvard admits, so the 2,000 students a year, 75% of them, so 1,500 of them, had strong personal scores. Okay. This is why the essays really, really matter, right? Because a lot of students have very similar academic profiles. And when you're applying to highly selective institutions, for example, and we're going to get to how this works functionally across, as I said, all types of institutions. But if you're applying to highly selective institutions, really the only way that they're really truly able to differentiate your students is on the personal side of the application. Okay. And so that's broadly what you see here. All right. Do we have questions on this, or we're going to start taking a look at how all this data interplays together? All right.
Yep, no, I think.
Yeah.
Go continue on.
This is fun. I don't know. I must have drawn on my screen here. I got some.
Oh, or somebody else might. Sorry.
Oh, maybe somebody else. I got green. I got green on my slides. So now we're going to take a look at how both of these fit together. So the academic and the personal score. The thing that you'll notice is, right, this is like the exceptional category, like nobody's there, right? This is the strong category, and this is sufficient, right, is this kind of third box. So as you see here, very few people like below the personal bar, very few people that are below the academic bar, right? That's that 17% number. Everybody's kind of grouped up here. All right. So effectively what that means is that 1 in 3 applicants basically have like strong academics, sufficient personal, or 1 in 3 have sufficient academics, sufficient personal. By the way, this category 1 in 3 at Harvard is a 0.1% admit rate. Okay. 0.01% admit rate. Actually, that's what I meant. So it is like tiny, right? Like very few students are getting in here. And a lot of those are like legacies and that sort of thing. Or what we call Dean's List, which is basically kids of very wealthy people or influential people. Here on the academic score, if you're strong academically, strong personal score, that's below 1 in 10 applicants, right? Or below 1 in 10 applicants for even strong personal or sufficient academics. And this is where you really want to be, right? Ideally up here, but if you can get here, that's also really important. Because this is basically how it looks, right? So if I draw a line of 75% of all admits, this is kind of what it looks like, okay? So people that are in the strong category are in really good shape. If you're in like the strong academics, but just sufficient personal score, like you're not in a great shape, right? Your admission rate is like 2.5%, right? But you might be, those 2.5% might be legacies or athletes or other things that kind of have a little bit more of a nudge to allow them to accept them. And then you also see students down here, right? And we do see some acceptances down here where it's just like sufficient academics, strong personal score. You do see like some good stuff there. But this is for like a highly selective institution, less than 15% admission rate. And what happens is that as the admission rate changes, the line changes, okay? And so this is like, now we're going to talk about different types of schools and how essays may or may not be important for those schools. But basically, right, higher admission rate is essentially one of two things has to be in place to have a high admission rate. So for example, let's take, so Georgia Tech gets about the same number of applicants a year as Harvard. but they accept a lot more students than Harvard, right? I think it's like 5 times as many students, maybe more, right, than Harvard. So they can now start taking a lot more students they're taking like everybody in the strong category, right? And now they're like, hey, I'm going to start taking people in the strong academic, strong, sufficient. Like, oh, I'm going to take people in the strong personal but sufficient academics, right? So they could start like now taking a bunch of people from other areas. And in that case, at many institutions, you start finding that, okay, your essays may not actually matter, right? Because if you're in the strong academic category, your essays may not matter because the school is actually able to accept you. And so that is kind of like, broadly speaking, how this works. Now, things get very different very quickly because, as we talked about before, this can depend on major, right? So at, let's say, Carnegie Mellon, their computer science department may be effectively this green line, and their drama department, which is also very difficult to get into, maybe this green line, but their other departments may be this orange line, effectively, right? So a lot of this is like, what are you applying to at which schools, and so on, right? So an example would be at Harvard, if you're applying for medicine, and Harvard doesn't even have majors, by the way. Like, you don't apply to a certain major, you just apply to the school, like a lot of these kind of liberal arts schools. But let's say you're saying your career intention is in medicine. At Harvard, your admit rate for a career intention in medicine is only 4%, compared to an admit rate of a career intention in teaching would be 11%. All right. So once again, just a lot more people applying with career intentions in a, and obviously they don't hold you to the career intention, but in medicine versus teaching. And so, I always say, like, don't try to game the system that way. Just apply in what you're actually interested in doing in the future, because it will kind of show in your application, be like, this person wants to be a teacher, but yet they're doing something that's not related to that at all, right? In their backgrounds. But that is, something really, really important to consider as well. In-state versus out-of-state also does matter in this case. So in some cases, like in-state, you may, maybe like this orange line, and you're applying out of state to a large public institution, may be closer to this green line. Although it kind of depends a little bit. It depends on which school you're applying to in which state and how many out of state applicants they take. Once again, sometimes you can find information on how many out of state applicants they had and how many out of state acceptances they had. Like, that's good information to find, but not necessarily all schools publish that information, or at least make it easy to find some of that information. But this is really important. So if I was to like just distill it down, like in terms of like when personal score matters, effectively when essays matter, it's whenever you're applying to like a very highly selective institution. So basically like an IB or an IB equivalent. It really matters when you are applying to a private kind of smaller institution, even with higher admission rates, as long as if you're kind of unsure of where you are at from an academic score perspective, like they can matter quite a bit. If you're applying to a large public institution and you're applying, in a major that's maybe not the most selected major at the school, they may not matter at all for you, right? Especially if it's in state, sometimes out of state. But if you're applying for a very competitive major, there's a very good chance that it will matter, right? So my general philosophy is, look, it's essays. They don't take as long as you think, which was what we'll talk about later. but just put the effort in. Give effort to the essays, because it also, the nice part is when you're working on these essays, it improves your writing abilities, right? Which is all something that's actually really important for succeeding in college. That's important for succeeding after you graduate. And so I always strongly recommend, obviously I run an essay focused company, a writing focused education company, but, put the effort into the essays. You might as well, because you might not know exactly where you fit from an academic, perspective, right? So that's kind of the general philosophy here.
So, Brad, I think you're pretty close to, people want to kind of get to the essays.
Oh yeah, we'll get to the essay. Sorry, apologies. We'll go through essay stuff. All right, cool.
But this was very, very valuable.
Yeah. So the key here is, right, strong academics increase your admission chances up to 3x. Non-academics like your essays is up to 10x. So once again, we're getting back to purpose of the college application, prove success in college and beyond, right? So what does that mean? Well, for essays, we always hear students are told, tell your story. Okay. Now, that is advice that is incomplete at best and incorrect at worst. And so what students end up doing is they end up writing about stuff that does not prove that they will be successful in college and beyond. They write about, for example, I tore my ACL and it was very difficult for me and I was sad and I couldn't play the sport, but I recovered and now I play my sport again, right?
And it could be beautifully written.
And it could be very beautifully written, right? Sorry, I gave the non-beautiful version. But it could be very beautifully written. But once again, like that does not prove that you're going to be successful in college. Like what does that tell me kind of about you, right? And, you know, we also find a lot of students, for example, write about their cultural background or their family background. And that's nice. That's useful information. But if I'm not understanding like how you're going to be successful in college, what you've done in your past that displays that you're going to be successful in the future, that's not really that helpful for me, right? I do want to understand where you came from. That could be useful information, but I need to know kind of that within the context of how is that going to show that you're going to be successful in the future? That's what really matters, right? So telling your story, great. You can tell your story, but it must relate to proving success in college and beyond. And there's 5 traits that colleges are looking for in applicants. So I'm going to talk about these 5 traits. I cover these all the time. I'll talk a little bit about like the prompt system where you can kind of help you figure out which of these traits you have. But generally, these are the 5 traits that colleges look for in applicants. The first is drive. So these are students that will succeed no matter how long the odds. They're coming through challenging situations, difficult situations, getting out, becoming out like a better person as a result of it. Usually that means not just like sitting idly as you are in a challenging situation and it ends. It's like the student has actually taken actions that have bettered the situation and led to a better result kind of at the end of a challenge, right? Or of a situation, okay? Colleges love students that are driven because when they come across challenges, when they're in college, guess what? They're going to get through those challenges. They're going to succeed. They're going to graduate. They're going to pay tuition, all that sort of fun stuff, right? So that's number 1, drive. Colleges such as Harvard and many others that are kind of in this consortium related to what we care about in college admissions, they call this grit. I call it drive. It's just a preference of mine, but it's really about perseverance, right? And getting through challenging situations. The second is intellectual curiosity. So these are students that love learning just for the fun of it in their free time. They're kind of always investigating topics or subjects that they're interested in, all right? Schools love students that are intellectually curious, that are self-learners, because, well, you're going to want to learn outside of the classroom. You're going to want to continue your learning. You're going to be more likely to be successful. Intellectual curiosity matters so much that Stanford University has an essay that is just known as the intellectual curiosity essay. Talked about earlier, Emory University calls their personal score intellectual curiosity, right? This is something that really, really, really matters to colleges. Third is initiative. So these are students that are really entrepreneurial. So whenever they're a part of a group or an organization, they're like, I see something that can be changed, right? And be made better. But not only do they identify what can be made better, they actually act on it and they do it. All right. And that really matters because colleges love leaders, people that are going to contribute to the class, right? That are going to go and kind of move the student body forward and make progress. Number 4 is contribution. So these are students that no matter what group of people they're a part of, they make that group better as a result of their being there, okay? Colleges love contributors. And the main reason why is they are the connective tissue across the entire student body that makes everybody within the student body better, okay? Colleges are always trying to find these people. These are kind of like the super connectors, the people that everybody loves, right? That are relentlessly positive, that kind of build everybody up and make everything better. And then the 5th is diversity of experiences, okay? We say experiences because people have different life experiences, different interests, different ways of thinking about the world or viewing the world, different goals in life, different things that they want to pursue. All of that really matters because they want to bring together students that have a bunch of unique perspectives that can share with other students to kind of influence how each of the students think, okay? And this is really important as well. As I said, they're trying to have an impact on not just like one industry or one thing. They want to have an impact on a lot of different things. And so that's why, right, the admission rate of like a teacher somebody wants to be a teacher at Harvard is like 11% versus somebody that wants to go into medicine is 4%, right? So these are like the 5 things that really, really, really matter to colleges. And within your essays, what you want to do is within a single essay, you want to hit on at least 1 or 2 of these strengths. Across multiple essays, you might keep reinforcing those strengths, or you might start hitting on other ones of these topics. But you want these traits to really shine through, and especially your strengths to shine through within your applications. Okay. This is
Brett,
critically important. Go ahead.
we have a good question. Before I read the question, I just want to emphasize to people, like, if you take nothing away from tonight, I mean, hopefully you took away something from the conversation earlier about the importance of essays, but if you take nothing away from tonight, this is the most important thing that you should remember. And I'll even screenshot it and send it in the email tomorrow.
Yeah, this really matters. This is the thing that like everybody's screenshotting, everybody's taking notes on, etc. So it's like this, and just remembering, once again, your goal of your application is to prove you're going to be successful in college and beyond. This is how you do it, right? You talk about your experiences, what you've done to date that are related to these 5 traits. So oftentimes we see students that are like, they read essays and they're like, wow, this essay is great because it has metaphors and analogies and like has some beautifully written prose, right? They're reading the examples that are like published in the New York Times. Guess what? Who decides that what goes in the New York Times? Those are journalists. They're not admissions officers. Okay. So they're looking for different things. They're evaluating these on completely different things, right? So we always run into students that are like, hey, I need to have this great metaphor, great analogies or whatever. And yeah, you know what? There's many students that I always just say like solid essays, right? So in other words, they're structured in a very clear way. They have great compelling content within it. It's very readable, very clear. They make their points extremely well. And the admissions officer is like, yep, check. This person is a strong, strong personal score candidate, right? That's really compelling. And then that student gets in. And then you have the student that has like some beautifully written essay, and the admissions officer walks away thinking like, well, what did I actually learn about the student? Oh, that was really nicely written. And then when you think about it, you're like, huh, what did I really learn about this student? Like what makes them tick? What
they'd rather really learn. Do you have one of these traits? Then did you have a great, well-written essay? I mean, obviously the best is a combination.
Yeah, it's not, a combination too is great, but guess what? Not all. I always say it's like 1/10 of 1% of writers are going to maybe do the combination of that. Your goal is not to try to do something beautiful at the expense of this, right? And that is really, really critically important. And so like, let me give like an example or two of, I always get a question on like good topics, bad topics. So
before we do that, can I ask, and this is kind of related, there's a question here, which I think it's a really good question. Joshua is saying, how would I write the drive focused essay without being too cliched? So he said he feels like he's tried to write that essay, but it comes across as like that classic, I worked too hard and I didn't give up. Like, so, like,
a lot of this is just like how you explain stuff sometimes, right? So a lot of students also like wax philosophical about the world and their view on the world that has now changed. And let me tell you, you're like 17, 18, right? Like it's not like you have like some maybe you think you have some profound like views of the world, but maybe not, right? And so some of that can come across as questionable in the essay. So let's talk about drive. And I'm going to do this in the context of good essay versus bad essay, because I think a lot of this does relate to like, how do you show drive within an essay? So a very common essay that we see is about athletics. Okay. So students in athletics, and we'll see an essay that's like, hey, I was really tired in the game, but I dug down deep and I scored the game winning goal. And like, that's the essay. All right. Now it somehow ends up being 650 words of that, but that's the summary of the essay. Now, what that means though, is that doesn't really show drive, but a way to write that in a much more compelling way is to say, okay, what is everything that you've done that may have led up to that moment? So for example, maybe the student was not a great soccer player, but built themselves into a great soccer player. And they did that by watching like Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo. They were watching YouTube videos dissecting exactly what they did. They spent hours a day practicing learning those different skills, building up their skills, etc. And then just at the most important critical moment of the season, they happen to be able to break out one of those moves. It worked. They scored the game-winning goal. Yay, everybody's happy. Okay. And what's awesome about that essay is it shows drive, because you're explaining to me kind of the actual actions and steps that you took to make yourself better, right? And then you're focused on an outcome, right? So what did that actually entail, right? What did that actually get you, right? It actually showed that, hey, I actually use these things. I just didn't learn them. I actually did something with them and it had an impact. And that shows drive, intellectual curiosity in droves in that kind of essay. And it's like, once again, here's this topic that's normally relatively mundane related to athletics, but you've turned it into an essay that's actually about drive and intellectual curiosity, right? So a key with just like any essay about drive is to really think about the experience that you went through, the actions that you took that showed that drive, and then talk about like kind of like who were you before that experience, who are you now after that experience, and what have you gone on to do since, right? So all of this can kind of be pictured and put together where you're not really saying that, oh, I'm this driven person, but you're really just like showing it through the examples and the actions that you've taken. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Other questions, thoughts here? You know, I always say there's no such thing as a bad topic to an essay. They're just, you just need to make sure you're covering at least these traits within it, right? So a lot of students struggle with like athletics, band, theater, you know, overcoming injuries, sometimes family related essays. But once again, like all of that can be really good content, provided that it's touching on like, you know, one or more of these traits in a meaningful way.
So there is a question about how much to talk about extracurriculars in your personal statement versus maybe if there are supplemental essays that are asking about extracurriculars.
So let's just kind of broadly talk about the different types of essays students need to write first, and then we'll get into that. So the answer is, you know, most students are going to write the common application essay. Some students also, depending on what institutions you're applying to, also have to write shorter supplemental essays. Some of these are 250 words, 350 words, 150 words, 50 words in length. Depending on where you're applying, there might be like, I think Stanford has like 8 essays that you write in addition to the common application essay. Cornell has just 1 essay that's like 500 words that you write in addition to the common app essay. Columbia has like 7. Harvard, I think, has 2 or 3, right? So it just kind of depends on what you're doing. And many students we find if you're applying to highly selective institutions and multiple of them, you might be writing like 40 or 50 essays in total. Now, there's a good amount of content overlap with cross essays, but schools have somehow figured out a way to like not make them perfectly match, right? So you're always kind of like making slight modifications here or there, especially for like a why essay, like why are you applying to this school? There's always like big changes for. So to get back to like, what do you write about in the essay? I always say for the common application essay, focus on your most compelling content because you have more space, more opportunity to kind of tell like a story with multiple pieces that kind of fit together, you know, in a linear way, right? So one action leads to another action leads to another action that you have taken. Now that can be about an extracurricular. Why not, right? As we mentioned, you're not exactly beholden to like, I get a score on this essay, I get a score on this essay, I get a score on this essay. No, that's not what happens, right? They kind of read this in totality and like form a whole picture of who you are. So it really doesn't matter which content fits in where, just kind of pick what makes the most sense for each thing. So that's kind of my general philosophy on it.
So Brad, here was a question that actually somebody sent in to me. They said, I'm hearing 2 different things about how to write the college essays. One is the advice of write the way you talk so the admissions people get to know who you are, versus write to show your writing abilities. So meaning, you know, use bigger words and show that you're a good writer. Or maybe neither of those advice are good.
Okay, so the answer is, a good way to think about this is readability. Okay, so when you use like really big words, very overly complex sentences, that decreases your readability of your essay. So if the average admissions officer is spending 8 minutes reading your entire application, you do not want your essays to be hard to read. Okay. You don't want your admissions officer to have to think about what you're writing, like, at all, right? Like, you want them to be like, here's the information you need to know, and you need to present that in a super clear way. So, I'll give an example. Like, some people are thinking, hey, I need to like write in like an overly sophisticated way. If you're having to literally find vocabulary words to use, your admissions reader may not actually be able to just read and understand that vocabulary word themselves very easily. Like, think about yourself in like 5-6 years. Sometimes like admissions readers, especially at like small liberal arts colleges, literally are recent college graduates of that college. Okay. And so it'd be like, would I know that word in 5 or 6 years? Or like, if I was reading something and coming across that word, I would think, would I have to stop and think about what that word actually means within this context? And that's bad when that happens. So the simple advice is write simply. Okay. That means you need to write and present content in a very clear way. Long, complex sentences really does nothing for you in terms of like helping people think that you're more intelligent. Actually, the more simply you write, the more intelligent that you will seem. So for example, like the New York Times, their average sentence length, I think, is about 15 words. Okay. I typically like, when I write, my average sentence length is about 12. Okay. Because I really focus on like simplicity. But in academia, if you go and like read some research paper, it's like 20 plus words average. And you're just like, oh, this is so dense. Like, I don't want to keep reading, right? That's not what you want. That's not what you want here, right? You just want your content to come through in a very simple, clear, concise way. And there's ways to kind of show, with sentence variety, sentence length variety, etc., that you can show kind of your breadth of writing skill associated with that. And so it's much better to just like focus more on just like how you naturally write, your personality, that sort of thing. But then you're actually really going through like a deep revising process to really identify where you're not clear within your writing so you can improve upon it. That's what really matters here.
So, Brad, I'm looking through the questions that people submitted
Yeah.
with registration, and the most popular question is really just how as a student, how do I get started? As a parent, how do I help my student get started?
Yeah, awesome. So let's talk a little about Prompt. We're also just going to talk about how you can support your student, even if you don't use us, because we have some really cool tools that you can do that with. Okay, so general gist of this. We have next week. I think that's next week.
Yep.
Sorry, I've like lost track of all time. It's busy these times of year. So we have an essay boot camp next week. This is pretty cool because you get to attend a couple of live sessions with our expert writing coaches. These are like smaller group sessions. So typically we have like a maximum of 10 students for one writing coach. So each student gets a good amount of individualized time as they're working through like what they're going to write about, how to create their outlines as they're writing, as they're revising their essays, etc. And this comes with like a couple of rounds of feedback from our writing coaches. So that's one option to work with us. I think the last time we did this, Debbie, about 30 or so Road to College parents signed up into that program, okay, which was awesome. All right. And a lot of people had great experience and got their essays done. Some people are kind of still finishing up their essays and we're bugging them about it, but they got their essays done. And a lot of kids got it done within about 7 or 8 days, basically. So you're just like, great, just get that Common App essay done. You don't have to worry about it. Try to get your essays done before the beginning of the school year, right? The other ones are one-on-one coaching. And so last time we did this, there was about 100 or so Road to College families that signed up into this. It's a great value. So you actually it's essentially unlimited coaching, right? Usually students are getting a couple of video calls with their coaches. We talk through like what we call your application plan, which is like all of your experiences that you're going to use across all of your essays. Then we talk about the common application essay. You get multiple reviews of those drafts and kind of take you through from start to finish with that essay. And students can, you can then upgrade to work with your coach on supplements. You work with a single writing coach, okay, through that entire process. And then you can say, hey, I also want to do my supplemental essays for these schools, and you can upgrade into that as well. Tonight only. So if you're interested in doing this, which by the way, there's a complete money back guarantee for all of this, get it tonight because you get an extra $10 off. And when my development team wakes up in the morning, they're turning that off. Usually they're up, sometimes they're up around 7, sometimes they're up around 8, sometimes they're up around 10. So do it tonight. It just depends. We had a few people that got in under the gun last time for that, like at 7:50 a.m. before it got turned off. But I would highly recommend doing this. A lot of Road to College families have had a lot of success with this, as well as many other students. We work with thousands of students a year. And what's really cool about this program is it comes with, I'm going to highlight a couple of quick things, because if you're even not interested in that, there's a bunch of free resources. You come here on the prompt.com/road to college page and you click create your free account. And there's a bunch of really cool free resources, which is actually within here. So this is kind of how our system looks. So I can actually schedule apparently a call with my own coach, which is me. So I can schedule my own call, see when I'm available, all that sort of stuff. But the cool thing here is that we actually have a list of every single essay that you need to write. So
this is also, I'm doing like a highlight. This is really, really valuable.
Yeah. So come here. Let's say I had the University of Michigan. I can set that. Let's say I'm like, I like University of Michigan. I would attend there. So, you can kind of set these different levels. I can see my essay list. So I can see like every essay that I need to write for that school. I can see any optional essays. So for example, here, I might be applying for, let me apply for like a, business degree. There's a couple of extra essays that I need to write. All of that's within this system. Those essays are currently being updated. Some of the schools are releasing them now. Other schools, when the common application is released August 1st, will keep releasing those. But this is really important. The other thing that I'll just highlight, which is this Brainstorm essay ideas section, is basically a curriculum on how to write all sorts of different types of college admissions essays. All of our students that we work with, even our coaching students, will do the application plan, because that helps you kind of identify which of these 5 traits do you have, helps you brainstorm content related to those traits, and then helps us have like a really good discussion with your students, whether or not that's in the boot camp or in a one-on-one setting, or you to have a good conversation with your students about what they might write about, as well as like to structure, develop outlines for your Common App essay, your University of California personal insight questions, or other types of essays that you may need to write. And what's cool about that is after you brainstorm all your content, you can sync that into what we call your content plan, and even like tag that to different schools, essays within each school. So this whole system kind of helps you manage the entirety of the essay process. And that's how we work kind of with you and your students, right? Forever you want to do. So I just wanted to kind of show that, highlight that, because it's a pretty cool thing. And by the way, like just this feature of just like, here's a list of everything you need to do is really valuable, because the Common App essay application, a lot of times we see students, like, so over 90% of students submit their application within like 2 days of the deadline. Okay. For a college. And as you're going through the application, sometimes depending on how you answer certain questions, other essays pop up. And so students that aren't using our program, sometimes we hear about them. They're like, oh my goodness, I didn't see this essay that I now need to write. And my application is due in like an hour, right? And they're like scrambling to write 250 extra words, right? That's not what you want to do. So, we have, tens of thousands or more students that use that data. So it's very trustworthy, hundreds of counselors that rely on that data. So I highly recommend kind of at least, getting in, creating your free account, but I also just highly recommend like work with a coach. This is like it's a hard process. And, when we provide feedback on a Common App essay, we're spending like 48 minutes providing feedback on that. And a lot of teachers, counselors are really, really good, and they're good at this, but they just don't have the time a lot of times. And so we have the time, right? That's kind of the key thing here. So you want to get this done over the summer, so you're not stressed about it, right? We always say like, at least get the essays done for, your Common App essay, and your essays done for at least your like top choice or top 3 choice schools. So that way you can head into next semester relatively relaxed and just kind of roll with it and enjoy senior year.
So Brad, there's been a few questions about supplemental essays. Is there like a package or, something that people can purchase that would help them just for the supplemental?
Just for supplemental, yes, you do need to reach out to our team about that. Our phone number is on the page. So if you don't want the common application essay help, there is an option for that. Most students work with us kind of across the whole spectrum. But in terms of like the costs associated with that, you can also buy like individual reviews from us for $75 for a review. But if you're upgrading, let's say it's your like top 3 choice schools, that upgrade from this can run somewhere between $800 and $1,200 for your top 3 choice schools, which is like an option that a lot of people utilize. And the difference in prices basically just depends on like how essay intensive are the schools you're applying to, right? So as we were talking about before, like MIT has 5 essays, right? Other schools have like 7. Other schools have 1, right? So it really just depends on how complex that whole process is in terms of the pricing, because we're basing it off of the amount of time that our coaches need to spend supporting you and your students.
Can you explain a little bit more? There's a question about the essay boot camp in terms of within what time frame does somebody have to use their 2 rounds of feedback?
Yeah, you can use it in whatever time frame you want. We really push students to get it done earlier. And so we want you to ideally use that within, so let's say our boot camp is starting, I think it's on Tuesday next week, I believe, right? So Tuesday, Thursday, hopefully you're done with your essay by Tuesday or Wednesday of the next week. So you use your couple of rounds of feedback by then. We always turn everything around within 48 hours, the feedback. And sometimes it's a lot faster than that. So a lot of students get it back the next day.
So Brad, an important question that people are asking, which I know that you can share about, is really like, who are the writing coaches? How do you select them? What are their credentials?
Debbie, you're always just reminding me.
It's the audience.
The audience, yeah. So our writing coaches are the top 2% of all writing coaches and instructors in the world, right? That's the easiest way to think about it. We get thousands and thousands of applicants to be writing coaches for us each year. We accept about 2%, all right? They go through a really rigorous training and evaluation process that is more rigorous, way too rigorous probably. It really like helps kind of people understand like, okay, here's the most effective ways to provide feedback to students that we know that the students are going to be able to take and act upon. Because we're not just providing feedback on like grammar, right? Or sentences and like improving that. We're focused on like the holistic picture of like all the content, the way that the content is structured, and how, like, what are the gaps in the content that need to be filled in. The typical backgrounds of our writing coaches, everybody has an undergraduate degree. Most actually have master's degrees. And a lot of them have backgrounds as like professional writers, so like journalists, playwrights. So journalists, playwrights, we have educators, we have a lot of people with like masters in like fine arts, right, and creative writing. So we have authors, fiction writers, nonfiction writers, etc. We have people even from STEM backgrounds, but just have like really strong writing interests and that sort of thing as well. It's kind of like varied, but the key kind of thread is that, they've all passed like an extremely rigorous evaluation and training program.
Another good question. Susan is asking, how do you match the students and the coaches?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so you will actually be contacted. So you have like what we call your point person, or as I often refer to as a guide. Internally, we call these people POPs because it stands for proactive outreach person, but it's kind of like your dad just being like, hey, get this done, get this done. And so what we do is we will get some information from you. It's just in terms of like when you're getting started, we're taking a look at some of the schools that you're applying to, some of your interests and that sort of thing. And we match the coaches based off of that. We have such a wide kind of selection of coaches. We do suggest a coach to you and we're like, hey, here's the coach that we recommend for you. You can always say, no, I'm not a fan of that background, but more often than not, you're like, yep, this is awesome. You go in, you have a coaching call with that coach, and almost everybody connects extremely well with their coach, and goes forward with that coach. But occasionally you might not connect as well with your coach as you would hope. Just like might be a personality related thing. And then we just give you a different coach, right? That will, fit with what you are looking for, and will, kind of guide your student through the process. We have over 100 coaches, essentially, right? So it's not, and we know them very well. And so we're pretty good at assigning people.
So there is a kind of a big topic that you missed or didn't talk about yet. And it's really about, there are different prompts, right, on the Common App. And so how do you pick which one to write about?
Oh yeah. There's a reason why I don't cover that, because it doesn't matter. That's the answer. So the general gist of this is, it's a mistake to figure out what prompt you're going to write before you figure out what you want to write about. Okay. So first you figure out, here's my most compelling content. Here's what I want to write about in my common application. Then you select your common application prompt based off of the content that you are planning to include and write about. There is a common app prompt literally for any possible topic you're going to write, because common app prompt number 7 literally is a topic of your choice. So we recommend, just figure out what you want to write about first, then select your prompt next. Okay. And there's some prompts I like more than others. I could talk about that, but it's kind of irrelevant to some degree, because as I said, figure out what you want to write about first and then select your topic.
Here's another good question, which I don't think we've touched on before, but basically somebody's asking, is it important to write in the first person or the third person? Or, is one of those something to be avoided?
The answer is first person. Okay. So you're using like, I did this, right? Not like Debbie is an awesome person. Debbie did this, right? Debbie did that. Like, no, it's I. That's how you want to write this. And that's all of your essays, not just your like common app personal statement. That's it.
I'm just looking for some other questions we haven't covered yet. So would you say, are there any topics that should be avoided?
I mean, anything that paints you in like a really bad light, right? So, if you've stolen something and you probably don't want to write about that, for example, or arrested, you might be writing about that in the arrested part of the application, or felony conviction or misdemeanor, or, charges or that sort of thing. We do get questions about like writing about like anxiety, depression, those types of things. And the answer there is, you have to ask yourself, number one, is that really important, like core to your being, right? And how has that kind of like affected you? And does that make sense to write about? But number two is like, what actions have you taken that have made that better, right? So maybe less anxiety, less depression, those types of things, because you have to look at it from like once again, proving success in college and beyond. Students that may struggle in college in some way, shape, or form, those are students that they don't necessarily want to accept. Yet students that have been through adversity and challenges, like we've talked about before, are students that they want to accept, but they want to know that they've kind of like come out a better person, right? That this is not likely to be an issue potentially in the future. So we see a lot of students write about like learning disabilities and kind of how they've grown and still been able to get through this and improve and all that sort of stuff. And that can be like really, really great content, because it shows a lot of drive, it can show initiative in many ways, it can show diversity of experiences. All of that can be within there. But once again, it's like stuff that where you're like we see a bad one is like grades, right? So it's like, I was getting C's in a class. I decided to try hard and I got A's, right? That's not a great essay, because it's like, well, why weren't you trying hard in the first place, right? So these are so there's like a few things that you're, and a lot of it's just like how you write about it more than anything. There's almost always a compelling way to write about anything, I find. And so it's really about kind of finding that storyline and finding that thread that does make it compelling, if it's something that you really deeply want to write about.
So another question, and this always comes up too, is this like, emphasis on that first paragraph, that hook sentence, like, how much should people be stressing over that?
It's useful. It's probably less important than you think it is. The most important thing is within your first few sentences, I need to have a very clear understanding of what this essay is about, and have a, like, if I was to guess, like, if I was to, like, imagine your admissions reader read your first paragraph, they should be able to pretty easily write the rest of your essay and be pretty close to what it says. Okay. And the reason for that is obviously there's probably some twists and turns or other information. Like, think of it like a movie in some ways, right? So when you watch a movie, you generally have a pretty good idea of how the movie is going to end before you watch, like within the first few minutes, right? And there's a reason for that, right? It's like you're kind of helping your audience along and helping them understand like what's going to happen, where is this headed, what's the plot, who are the main characters, what's going on here, right? And then really you're reading to understand like the journey and like how did the person actually get there and like what were the outcomes right along the way, and maybe there's some surprises, right? And so like that's the way you want to approach this. A lot of times we see students, they write about something and like the most compelling piece of content, like I'm just kind of like, okay, how is this relevant? I'm not really sure what traits these are related to. And then boom, like 3/4 of the way through the essay, I find something really interesting. And now I'm like, I have something really interesting here. Should I reread the entire essay with this new piece of information to understand the rest of the essay better? Like, that's not good, right? You don't want your reader to have to like work for it. Like, another way to think about it is like, write like a journalist writes. So journalists, you always hear like, don't bury the lead. Like the lead, it's actually spelled LEDE, is like, what is this story about? Like, what is this about? That you want to make sure comes clear within the first few sentences, especially like if it's about a topic that, let's say it's about sports in some way, they might think, oh, not another sports essay again. You need to make it clear that, yeah, the setting might be sports, but it's actually about something else, right? That needs to be clear from the beginning of the essay.
So, I mean, bottom line is, and I go back to, you said there's 8 minutes on the whole application, and you actually want to make the person reading everything kind of not have to really work
when they are thinking, you are putting yourself at risk of them not understanding you.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And by the way, so just to give you because I do a lot of work in like workplace writing as well. There's some 50% of all like workplace like digital communications are misinterpreted. Okay. So what that shows is like a lot of times like anybody that's reading something could misinterpret it for tone, misinterpret it for what it means, like what they're supposed to do, or why is this important, or any of that. And so a huge part of what our coaches are doing is like helping improve like the clarity, like the readability of the writing, because that is really important. Like, you don't want to leave this up to chance. You don't want to have to have your admissions officer connect the dots. Right. You need to connect the dots for them, right? That's really, really important. And so that's kind of why we look at like applications holistically, where like all the essays and pieces of information almost kind of need to fit together from an overall, like almost like your brand, like who are you as a student? They all need to kind of fit together in some ways that it kind of feels like, okay, I have a good sense of who the student is. If they're at odds with each other, that becomes difficult. Now the person's like, well, this essay was really good and about some great content, and this other one was kind of like, I don't know what's going on here. How does that even fit together? And now you're expecting your admissions reader to do a lot of work. And anytime you're expecting your admissions reader to do work, you're at risk of losing, right? I don't like to trust anybody to to have to figure out what I'm trying to say. And like, I know there's a lot of better ways that I can communicate as well. But you want to reduce that risk as much as possible, which is why like working with a coach, revising a lot, right? Really kind of thinking about it from like the perspective
and not waiting to the last minute. You need time to I say like let it marinate, you know what I mean? Kind of put it aside a day or two, go back, read it, and then you might kind of see it in a different light.
Yeah, I always say it's like, this is why it's like you're getting your feedback. You might get it back the next day or 2 days later, and now you can like you're like, okay, now you're like mentally processing it and like going through it again and seeing like how other people are reacting to it. The one thing I'll say is like most students are actually they might write their Common App essay now and they procrastinate and wait on supplements. That's a bad idea too. Because once again, like each essay itself is not worth more than another one, right? Just so happens the Common App essay is used across a lot of applications. But if your Common App essay is good and your supplements are not good, you're still overall not good, right? And so like I always think about, I did a presentation with the Dean of Admissions for Richmond last year. And he was saying, he's like, I can tell when students wrote the supplements like the night or two before, or like didn't put a lot of effort in. It's like, that's just like pass, right? Like, he's like, he just throw, like, even if it's probably like interesting, compelling student, like he was just like, I just don't even, it's like, I just want the student to put the effort in, right? Because he's like, that reflects poorly on the student. I don't think all admissions officers think that way. Like, let me be clear. But I was surprised a little bit at how forceful he was with that and kind of how he viewed it as well. And he's worked in a number of different admissions offices over the years. So.
Okay, so three main questions left. So one is, and again, this is interesting that people kind of put this a lot, several people said, how do I make my essay stand out? And I kind of think that's interesting that they feel that they need to make the essay stand out. So I don't know what your opinions about that is.
Yeah, I mean, your content needs to stand out.
Right. Like your story, meaning what you're trying to get across needs to stand out.
Yeah. So, and I think this is this is like, it gets back to one of the myths, right? So a lot of people believe it's like, I want my essay to be memorable such that this admissions officer will remember my essay for years to come. Well, I'll be honest, like if somebody asked me like, what's the most memorable essays that you've read? I'll talk about like, we had one student that like wrote about like, this was an early draft, so thankfully she didn't actually submit it, was like, I hope to create a mutant strain of Ebola to help control the world population. It was like really bad, right? And I was like, okay, like don't write that, right? Like that is really bad. And that was like before all this pandemic, and this was like 2015. And then you have like situations where you have students that are like writing about like, and that was memorable, right? But not in a good way, right? Then you have other students that are like, hey, like I'm afraid to clip my own toenails, right? So I always have somebody do that for me. It's like, well, ooh, that's too much information, right? I remember that essay, but once again, like it's memorable, and that student actually got into some interesting places, but I remember it because it has like some odd, like something different about it, right? I remember some essays from just like extremely high performing students that were able to kind of integrate something that's, and I remember just kind of like what they did, right? And like how they presented that information. But, I do remember these types of essays because yeah, they are different, but when you kind of think back on it, when I think back on it and like the totality of like the thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of essays that I've read, and you think like, was that essay better than the other ones? Not really. Okay. Probably was worse than a lot of the essays that were written. It just so happens to be, I remember it, multiple years later. Like, so my point is like, guess what? That probably doesn't matter, right? In the moments that your application is being evaluated, then your essays will maybe looked at again later by the whole admissions committee, right? And once again, they're kind of looking at the content and all of that in that context. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe it's nice if your essay is memorable that the admissions reader remembers it years later, but guess what? Like if somebody asks me that question, I'm only going to remember like 4 or 5 of the essays that I'm like, hey, these were really memorable. Even though I probably read hundreds or thousands that like were quality enough to be memorable. It's just like I remember the most random of writings, essentially, that's all, right? And that's just like a normal human behavior. So like you shouldn't think of it from like, how do I make it memorable in that regard, right? You need to just think about it from like, how do I make sure my content is memorable and like displays that, so they make notes about, hey, this is really good, this applicant's in the strong pile. And then when that gets pulled out again for more people to maybe look at your application as they're kind of doing final evaluations, that when people read it, and a lot more people read it, and the admissions dean reads it, that they're like, hey, I really understand who this student is. I really understand this content. It's really compelling. Boom, you're in. That's kind of how you want it to come across.
Okay, so another, actually, people didn't ask about this, but I know they're probably thinking, this is related to who should be reading and reviewing the essay, like, besides if they use prompt or not, like, this idea of giving it to this teacher at school or a friend who's, is a good writer, or, like the kind of the dangers of having too many people read it and give opinions.
Yeah, so the number one thing you have to ask yourself is, does this person actually that's going to read this actually understand what admissions officers are looking for? Number one, because a lot of people, if they don't understand that, will provide you feedback that's not what admissions officers are looking for. It's what they perceive is a good admissions essay when they may not know what a good admissions essay is. So that's number one. If you still want somebody to read it, you need to explain to them exactly what you want them to look for. Okay. So in that case, you want to say, hey, I want my essay to prove that I'm going to be successful in college. Okay. And I want you to read you give them some questions and you say, okay, what did you learn about me? Right. And have them write that down. What didn't you learn about me that you wanted to learn? Right. And have them write that down. Could you follow this essay in structure? Right. Or was this hard to follow? Could the structure be improved? And you have them write that down. Okay. The key is like, you never want to give the essay to anybody with no instruction, right? No, like, here's what I want you to look at. Because if you do that and you give it to somebody and you don't give those types of instructions, then what they're going to do is they're going to kind of go off on their own and make their own decisions, right? And that might be the opposite of what you actually want them to do. So I always recommend, like, yeah, it's nice when your parents read the essays, but once again, make sure you're kind of looking at it from those questions. I always say it's like, don't necessarily like change sentences, like just highlight sentences where you're like, hey, I'm reading this and it was unclear to me. Like, just circle that and write like unclear, right? That's like a good strategy. Or like tell your friend, like, just circle where it's unclear. Like, my writing is unclear. Like, that's another good strategy if you want to have like a friend look at it, right? Because that's the sort of thing that's like, okay, like, I have a random person that's reading my essay. I know that clarity really matters. Like, let me at least kind of highlight that. But where you really get into trouble, as I said, is like when you're not providing what you want the person to look at, and you're relying on them to kind of start understanding what colleges are looking for and their interpretation of what the essay should be. That's not ideally what you want. And we see that all the time, where people that don't have that understanding are trying to push students in the incorrect direction.
Okay, one other clarification piece. Somebody wanted to just, if you could explain a little bit more about what exactly a facilitated online lab is for that boot camp.
Yeah, so basically, like, the live sessions are effectively like facilitated writing labs. Okay, so in other words, you actually do work. Like, you're not just sitting there like watching to this, the same lecture on the same topics that we're talking about here, right? So when we do our first session, we are expecting you to have filled out our application plan basically in our system, right? So that's like here under brainstorming ideas, you're coming into the application plan and you've done this first. So then what's great about that is we can now, in the facilitated writing time, we're actually having a discussion around this, and you're getting started with like writing your outline for your essay. Okay. And then you go write your essay, you can get feedback on your essay. And the next session is either, if you've gotten your feedback back already, you can actually have a discussion around the feedback on how to implement that kind of with your writing coaches. Or if you haven't done that already, we put you in like a different group and you kind of like work on writing, right? Essentially, like, but it's facilitated such that you can get support and help like on what you're writing about and your outline, feedback on your outlines and all of that sort of stuff, in the process. So that's kind of how we generally approach it. The key here is like, we're trying to give each and every person that attends some individualized attention on the work that they are doing, right? Obviously, these writing sessions, these writing labs are 90 minutes each. So you know, a typical student is maybe getting 5 to 10 minutes of, you know, kind of more individualized or like sometimes group attention on what they're thinking about, you know, which is a little bit different than the one-on-one coaching. But the people that have gone through the essay bootcamp have found it very, very valuable.
Okay, last question is also just about the platform and all the essay prompts that are in there. Since this is like now, this is before August 1st. Are all of the essays current, or will they? Or
not all of them are current right now. I noticed the other day for some reason the labels weren't showing. I think those will be showing soon, like what's current and what's not. We actually have a page that if I can find it, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. I'm going to try to find that page and I'll drop that into the chat that actually tracks all of the essay prompts that are currently available. So let me see if I can find that here. Oh, I'm not finding that at the moment. So you know what I'll do? I'll send that out to Debbie and she can send that out to everybody. But you can also, I think, you know, kind of like that is something that we do have, but it's something that is kind of a work in process. And, you know, right now there's actually less schools that have released their prompts this year at this time than have released them last year at this time. So it's interesting, just FYI. And by the way, like, don't start writing the prompts until like the school has confirmed them. Okay. Because there's a lot of changes this year, even the schools that have not changed them more recently in the past. I know like MIT is out, University of Chicago is out, University of California ones are out, Common App, obviously, the main essay is out. University, I think most of Applied Texas is now released, but you know, just kind of throwing it out there, like, don't do that, right? Because then you'll find yourself like changing things around.
Okay, and one more. Oh, this is a good one to end on.
Okay.
Is there going to be a boot camp or any help for the UC application?
I think the answer is it's coming up. So I forget when it's scheduled for, but I think we're planning on one. But you can, if you want to just start getting help with that now, you can actually get your, we have a package that you can just contact us about. You know, you just go to prompt.com/road-to-college. And you can just contact us about the University of California option, and you can still get the discounts. We'll just apply that to the University of California option, right? Just keep in mind, like, you get the extra $10 discount tonight. Just do that, get signed on. The $100 discount for the one-on-one coaching is going away on Friday.
Yeah. So that's what I just wrote. Somebody else asked.
It will go away.
Yeah, it does go away. And somebody just asked, like, you know, if they got the one-on-one, do they have to start it immediately? And not really.
No. And by the way, you should get that now, because I don't think we're doing another $100 discount again, because we're starting to get to like super busy season. And so, and at some point prices even increase. And so I would highly recommend just getting started now. And then, as I said, you can always upgrade into doing supplements later. Our general path, by the way, in terms of how we work with students, is we do the common application essay. Then if you're planning on applying to the University of California system, we do those essays next, okay? Because one or two of those essays kind of gets derived from your common app essay. Then we do like your top choice school next, or one of your top choice schools, because those essays will have a lot of commonality with your University of California personal insight questions essays. And then we just work school by school, because what you want is for each school, like all the essays, like all the content to kind of fit together, as well as like we support you on your activities list, additional information section. So basically all the written components of your application. Scholarship essays are covered if it's a school specific scholarship. There's certain, you know, essays for certain programs, that's all covered within this. We do a lot of work with students that are applying to like the bachelor's MD programs, for example, and those really have a lot of essays, but we do that as well. You know, it's you know, we try to make this as comprehensive as possible. And you know, as we said, we have somebody that's like there also to just make sure that you're having a great experience, you're getting the work done, getting through the essays, because we want you to finish your essays as soon as possible as well, because we hate doing essays like right before the deadlines. There's a lot of people that want that. And so, we know how stressful that is, and it's not fun. And so, our goal is to get as much of the work done as we can with your students, before even the school year starts. So, you might not get all the schools done, but you get the ones that you are the most excited about. And then the other schools are simpler because they're all based on other essays that you've written.
So I will just share my personal comment. I am the mother of 3, have gone through this process, and each child, I started like earlier and earlier and earlier because you realize, the value of starting early. And somebody asked really, really early on, or maybe it's in these registration questions, like, how do we avoid fighting?
It's a good way to avoid fighting, by the way.
Right.
Having a third party. But no, seriously, one of the things that we find is that a big value that we provide is just nudging students to get the work done, right? Because otherwise students are going to procrastinate. Like, I procrastinated. I was going to apply to Caltech, and guess what? The night before I needed to mail the application. This was before like internet applications. Before I had to mail the application, the night before, I was just like, I sat down to write the essays, and I was just like, nah, not going to happen. And we see that for a lot of students, right? And so that's you want to avoid those types of situations. You want to avoid the fighting, and we can support and help you on that. Essays are one of the most common things that parents and students tend to struggle over. And I know, Debbie, we actually supported your son, right?
No, that was last year. So I honestly, I share that too, that, I don't just partner with Brad because I think he's nice, but I actually use his service for my son personally. And it was excellent. It really gave a tremendous feedback for his own essay beyond what I could provide. So, it was really a valuable service. And the one other thing I just want to add, and this was a comment from a parent just this week, which I also shared with Brad and his team, was one parent signed up and she wrote, we haven't even used the service yet, but I'm just so relieved. And her son was so relieved to know that they had the support and the resources, of somebody who was going to help them through the process. So that actually is helpful too, just to kind of relieve anxiety to know that there's somebody who has expertise who's going to help through the process.
Yeah. And I always joke a little bit, is like, we have this down to a little bit of like a science, right? In terms of like, mostly like the process, right? Where we know like the most optimal way for you to work through essays together, such that it will save you the most time and will yield the best result, right? That's kind of the approach that we take. So, I was talking with a parent the other week who was like, your content plan, just like going through that before we had a call with your coach was just so valuable, because when we did the call with the coach, we were just like, we went right into it. We were like, the coach reviewed the content plan at a time. We're like, here's questions, like, let's go, rather than like, hey, let me ask you some questions about like how your life is and that sort of thing, right? All of that is kind of put together ahead of time, and that just allows us to like get through the stuff and get a lot deeper, into your students' content and story a lot faster, right? And identify those areas that can really be compelling, on the application process. So that's kind of the approach that we take. We have a lot of success too, by the way. I think I forgot to mention this, but you might see this on the website, but as I said, essays are important. 10x increase in admissions chances. School students that we work with that are applying to reach colleges, so they're reach colleges, they get into one or more of those reach colleges at a 75% rate, which is really good.
That's very good. Yeah.
This is really good. Obviously, like, students are kind of selecting those themselves. If you're below the academic bar, that's, at certain schools, like, you're still not getting in, even if you're working with us. So don't be like, hey, my student that has like a 2.0 GPA, like, can we get them into Harvard with a good essay? No, not really. Okay. Right. But once again, if you're like above that academic bar, this is the type of thing, and you get multiple bites at the apple with your different applications. Like, we see a lot of good success by really being able to tell stories well, right? And because I know like so many, especially for all of you that are on the call this evening that are interested in essays, I'm sure your kids are doing some pretty interesting and compelling stuff and activities or things that they do. Last night I was talking to a student that like paints their, like does their own, like paints their own shoes. I didn't even know this was the thing. And it was like wild. It was like, he's like, yeah, I do so many.
You can, yeah. I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never seen that, never heard of it. And it was like really cool. So, there's all sorts of different things that can make for extremely compelling content that show a lot of intellectual curiosity, drive, the different traits, initiative, contribution, all that sort of stuff. All right. We got anything else tonight, Debbie?
I think that's it. I think we've covered a lot.
Yeah.
I really appreciate, Brad, you going through all of the data. No, really, it's very helpful, and kind of the approach that Prompt takes. And I think that hopefully people who were on tonight got value from it. I mean, I think that they should have.
And as I said, like, sign on, get the $10 discount. It's fully guaranteed. So like if you go through your first boot camp or coaching call and you're like, this is not for me, like we'll give you a refund. Like that almost never happens, right? So we really put a lot of faith in our coaches and like our training and our product and how we do this. And so we're here just like to support you. If you have any questions, you can message us, but you can also message me personally. It's brad@prompt.com. Just go to the prompt.com/road to college page, get signed up, get signed in tonight. As I said, it's easy to upgrade later, especially after you get your Common App essay done. Keep working with the same coach.
But big message is get started. Just get started, because
once you make even the purchase, you're like,
exactly.
That's the key. And if you're going to do it yourself, use our resources too, right? It's there for you. Just go to I'm here for the free resources. Essentially, it's what it says. I highly recommend doing that as well. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. See you again soon. Bye.